Hello, everybody. I'm back. I was just here at 12 o'clock today with Sabine Princess Duncan a couple of hours ago, and I'm back now. It means a lot to be able to bring you some amazing, amazing writers. And our next writer today, for those who joined you at noon, is a great continuation of the conversation that I had earlier with my earlier guests. So, with that said, thank you so much for joining me for episode 10 of season 5 of Black Writers Read. My name is Nicole Young Martin, and I'm the founder, producer, and host for the series. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, this is the second of two interviews for today. So I want to go ahead and get today's conversation started. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind-the-scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during the summer of 2020, we've hosted almost 70 authors representing 10 plus genres from 5 countries and 20 states. Our platform includes the live stream interviews, the audio podcast, book clubs, and curriculum development assistance. Find us online at blackwritersread.com. Today, I'm extremely excited. I get to finally host the Nerd in Chief. Today, we welcome Dr. DuEwa Frazier. And also, too, I want to mention, because this is a genre that I've been so excited about and really want to dive into, not only as an educator, but also as a creative as well. To learn some things, we'll be talking about Afrofuturism for the first half of our conversation today. Dr. DuEwa Frazier is an award-winning author, poet, writer, editor, professor, creative entrepreneur, keynote speaker, arts and education leader, and digital creator. She is the editor of Introduction to Afrofuturism, a mixtape in Black literature and arts. DuEwa's writing focuses on my script, just like sped by really fast. Here we go. Starting over. DuEwa's writing focuses on contemporary education issues, arts and culture, hip hop culture, women's interests, and opinion. Her TEDx Talk, Word is Bond, was given in 2019, and it is available for you to watch on YouTube. She has produced work in multiple areas in connection to writing, arts, and education management. Her research and work in the education field has focused on culturally responsive pedagogies, educational leadership, professional development, contemporary education issues, coaching and mentoring, arts and education initiatives, and student achievement. She is the author of several volumes of poetry and books for young readers, which we'll also talk about today, including Shedding Light from My Journeys, Stardust Tracks on a Road, 10 Marbles and a Bag to Put Them In, Goddess Under the Bridge, Poems, Deanne in the Middle, Quincy Rules, Check the Rhyme, an anthology of female poets and MCs, which was nominated for an NAACP Image Award, and Baby Ray's Old School versus New School Hip Hop Party. She is the founding publisher of Lit Noir Publishing and creator of Nerdacity Podcast and Afrofutures Pod. You can find her online at www.DuEwaWorld.com. And throughout her reading and conversation, I will be sharing links to her work. So today we'll be talking about, I wanted to make sure I share it, Introduction to Afrofuturism. I'm so excited to talk about this book, so much so, and then also some of her other work. Published by Routledge in August of 2024, Introduction to Afrofuturism delivers a fresh and contemporary introduction to Afrofuturism, discussing key themes, understandings, and interdisciplinary topics across multiple genres in Black literature, film, and music, from Afrofuturism's origins to the present. This critical volume features scholarly work, poetry, drama, and creative nonfiction, which illuminates on the contributions of notable Afrofuturists such as Octavia Butler, Sun Ra, N.K. Jemisin, Janelle Monáe, my apologies, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Okorafor, Saul Williams, Prince, and more. The volume highlights the impact of films such as Black Panther, The Woman King, and They Clone Tyrone, and covers a variety of essential topics, giving students a comprehensive view of the legacy of storytelling and the tradition of remixing in Black literature and arts. This volume makes connections across academic subject areas and is an engaging reader for pop culture and media, film studies, women's, gender and sexuality studies, Black and Africana studies, hip hop studies, creative writing, composition, and rhetoric. this is one of the reasons, well, many reasons, just so exciting to really dig deep into this book, because I'm all about interdisciplinary and everything talking to one another, especially with how it represents the culture. For those of you who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format of the series. DuEwa will read an excerpt from the anthology and will share some of her poetry. Then we'll chat. If time remains at the end of the conversation, we'll open it up to question and answer for those of you who are joining us today. We typically have viewers joining us from Facebook and YouTube. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comment section on the platform where you're joining us from today. I will compile the questions and either pose them to our guests following our conversation or insert them during an appropriate time during our chat. I'd now like to welcome Dr. DuEwa Frazier to the virtual stage. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Nicole. It's a pleasure to join you today on Black Writers Read, and I must tell you, you're doing an excellent job. I've been following you for a long while. I'm a fan of yours, and I'm very proud of the work you're doing in promoting Black writers. We need so many more people like you who are willing to promote this population of authors who go under promoted and under recognized in the field. So I want to start off by paying you your homage and saying thank you for your important work.
Thank you. So that means so much, Nerd in Chief. And I also want to make sure to give you your gardens of flowers and your botanical gardens of flowers, because of just how much, one, that you've done for the culture, but also two, how much you've done for writing and folks who are joining us. I do have a question for her about writing across genres, because I love that you've written poetry, plays for young adult, like just you've done so much to speak to so many various experiences in the African diaspora. So I want to thank you for being you.
Oh, that's I love that, and I appreciate it so much. And so, Nicole, your question is about writing across genres. How I've done that, or how one does that.
Yep, I'll be asking that later in the
later.
conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got you.
Yeah. So when you're ready to read, go right ahead, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, sure. I'd like to share of the introduction from Introduction to Afrofuturism, a mixtape in Black literature and arts. And I first want to start by saying this book is a culmination of not only my love of literature, my love of Black writers and Black literature and creative writing, but also my love for arts across the Black arts world and movement. And my vision was to create a book where multiple voices would come together and be a part of this work, whether they're poets or scholars or playwrights or writers. And that while it is academic, it's certainly a work that presents creativity, that provides critique, and that also gives us multiple lenses into themes related to Afrofuturism. So, and this is a book, and I'll just read a bit of the introduction here. Part 1 of Introduction to Afrofuturism illuminates the Afrofuturistic elements in the poetry, prose, drama, and the creative nonfiction contributions of Curtis L. Crisler, Zarina Exie Frey, Rand Walker, and Alan King, Rena J. Leon, and author Ricky Doc Flowers Jr. Part 2 of the volume introduces critical scholarship and essays on Afrofuturistic aspects in Black music and film by Paul Youngquist, DuEwa M. Frazier, Christian M. Hines, Juliette Gautier, Douglas Rasmussen, Jeffrey Renard Allen, Jeremy Laffery, Olayambo Reggie Oyelade, Olivia Uzodima Eka, and Shernay Ann Phillips, and also makes historical connections. Afrofuturism also explores Black feminisms and speculative prose in part 3 of the volume. And this features the work of Anindita Gozal and Eritrea Gozal, Clarice W. Richardson, Heather Thaxter, Ayana T. Hardaway, Jada Similton, Jasmine Wright, uh, Jasmine Wade, Keisha Allen, Michael Rashawn Hall, Victoria Moten, and A.K. Wright. So now I'm going to go back. I wanted to just give what the parts of the book are. Cultural critic Mark Derry first birthed the term Afrofuturism when he asserted in his essay, Black to the Future, that speculative fiction that treats African American themes and addresses African Americans' concerns in the context of the 20th century technoculture, and more generally, African American signification that appropriates images of technology and prosthetically enhanced future might, for want of a better term, be called Afrofuturism. Noted scholar Alondra Nelson defines Afrofuturism as culture and stories that incorporate sci-fi, technological innovation, and futuristic themes from a Black point of view. Similarly, author, filmmaker, and scholar Yatasha Womack defines Afrofuturism as Black imagination intersecting with technology and an envisioned future of liberation. Afrofuturism challenges us to envision a state of society in the world where Black isn't the enemy, where Black is not inferior, a reality that centers Black perspectives and character in unison with technology, animation, film narratives, fantasy, magical realism, and multifaceted arts and intellectual output. What was once culturally responsive pedagogy and simply incorporating a diversity of viewpoints into our curriculum now must open to more critical, engaging, and innovative visual depictions in cultural arts and scholarship representing global and underrepresented voices, reflecting artistic and political defiance in Black literature, music, and film of the African diaspora. And this is where my book, Introduction to Afrofuturism, a mixtape in Black literature and arts, comes in. This is the next frontier in the study of humanities, new media, hip hop and pop culture, African American studies, women's and gender studies, and the scholarship of globally minded and diverse individuals and creative writers. The social, technological, and artistic progressive future awaits at the intersection of our past and present cultural knowledge, creative expression, study, and decoding of what leading Afrofuturists, intellectuals, and artists have to tell us about what has gone and what is coming. Let's see, Nicole, do I have a little bit more time?
Yes, you do. So if you would love
Okay.
to read more, read some of your work, that'll be awesome.
Okay, great. I'm going to read a bit of my chapter in the anthology. And this chapter is titled Juice from the Mind, Afrofuturism in Hip Hop and Visual Culture. Afrofuturism in hip hop has been a music and visual art style within the genre that stems from roots in Black funk and rock music. The early purveyors of Black music merging rock and funk sounds include Jimi Hendrix, Betty Davis, Prince, Nina Simone, and George Clinton, and Parliament Funkadelic. I assert that these artists are the gods and goddesses of Afrofuturism in Black music, which led to later generations of hip-hop artists taking cues from the elders to remix the tradition of Black music and visual culture. Afrofuturism can be defined as African American voices with other stories to tell about culture, technology, and things to come, according to Alondra Nelson. Hip-hop artists using futuristic aspects in their performances and music videos reveals an exploration of new frontiers in Black arts and is necessary to innovate and move the culture forward. This is where we can begin to discuss the intersection of Black imagination, future thought, and liberation, merged to birth Afrofuturism in soul music and hip-hop. An early pioneer of Afrofuturism in Black music, poet, and jazz band leader, and synthesizer player, Sun Ra's experimental music represented a cosmic and spiritual take on jazz and Black arts. Sun Ra's music incorporated the awareness of the impending space age with Afrocentric elements, which influenced future generations of Black musicians, writers, and artists, including George Clinton. From the legacy of hip-hop's founding in the Bronx, New York, over 50 years ago by DJ Kool Herc, to hip hop. In the last 25 years, we have become immersed in new forms of hip hop music, performance, and visual culture that embraces Black womanist thought, futuristic vision of what Black life can be in its most free and ideal presence, and technology where digital aspects of space, representation in film, performance, and fashion are embraced. I'm going to talk now about Missy Elliott. Missy Elliott took a different approach when entering rap culture as a woman in hip hop. As an Afrofuturist representation of women in hip hop, Elliott changed rap when she effectively and deliberately diverted the male gaze. Rather than dress in sexy body-hugging attire, Missy Elliott gave the culture visual representations with an Afrofuturistic approach in her videos. Sex appeal, whether overt or covert, has always been a part of visual aspects of hip hop. However, in Missy Elliott's video, The Rain, Elliott is not concerned with showing sex appeal. Rather, she wears a bubble suit, large goggles, and a cap that is more of a space ensemble than a standard outfit a rapper would wear in a video. Similarly, more futuristic representations can be seen in Elliott's Sock It To Me video, featuring rapper Da Brat. In the video, Elliott appears in multiple spacesuits as she and other performers in the video have a battle that takes place in outer space. Elliott's lyrics in Sock It To Me signal that she is aware that she is giving her fans and listeners something new and unique to hold on to. As she raps, "I'ma show you things that you can't believe, jump in this beat." What Busta Rhymes and Missy Elliott have in common is that they are both rap artists who have a unique and animated presentation when it comes to lyrics and performances. Outkast, the hip-hop duo, Andre 3000 and Big Boy's music reflects what Alondra Nelson describes as artists who reflect the long and impressive history, African diasporic culture, but also push the envelope of these traditions. Pushing the envelope includes drawing upon foundations in funk and soul music, as well as presenting listeners with the duo's take on a futuristic existence in a Black world. Outkast albums helped to define what came to be known as Southern hip hop, but the artists also expanded the genre of hip hop music with songs such as Prototype and I Like the Way You Move. The influence of early Black soul and funk sounds merged with the hip hop duo's classic Southern sound. Notes that their own genre, bringing together virtuistic rap storytelling, soul, Afrofuturism, blues, rave, gospel, and funk is apparent. Howard Ramsey asserts that Outkast's second album, ATLiens in 1996, reflects histories and notions of flight and outsideness in Black artistic culture, coinciding with more recent concepts associated with space travel, expressed in the music and stage performances of artists before them, George Clinton and his mothership in one hand, and jazz musician Sun Ra on the other hand. And I'll end with a note about Miss Erykah Badu. Erykah Badu, since her rise to soul music stardom from 1997 to the present, has held a prominent position in Black culture. She is at once a hip-hop generation songstress, with her artistic ties to Outkast, The Roots, Common, and others. She is also a daughter of early Black soul and funk music, as her voice and stylistic imagery, as well as the music that accompanies her vocals, is reminiscent of the sounds of Billie Holiday, LaBelle, Diana Ross, Betty Davis, and Minnie Riperton. Badu's catalog includes love songs, love anthems, i.e. Window Seat, Call Tyrone, Orange Moon, and odes to hip hop and the culture, i.e. Back in the Day and Love of My Life. Known for crossing boundaries that keep her from being placed in stereotypical boxes for Black women artists, Badu's earlier Afrocentric style ushered in new representations for hip hop artists in the 90s and 2000s. Badu's place in Afrofuturism is rooted in her ability to constantly remix her sound and style, as seen through the evolution of her music and imagery on albums from Baduism in 1997 to Mama's Gun in 2000 to Worldwide Underground in 2003 and New America Part 1, 2008 and Part 2, 2010. Badu's videos reflect her transformation from Southern Earth Mama to Afrofuturist soul hop visionary. Badu's video for Didn't You Know revealed her dressing in a white futuristic form, fitting pantsuit with long train attached and matching oblong hat. In this video, Badu presents that she is an alien from another planet who has landed on Earth by mistake, searching for her place while in the desert. If the purpose of Didn't You Know is an alien search to find her home, despite displacement in an unknown region, then Badu's purpose as an Afrofuturist is to lead the listener to a place where Black imagination finds a home free of constraints, judgments, and labels. And Nicole, is that all the time I have?
You could take up as much space or as little space as you like. Like if you would love to
Okay.
read something else, yeah.
Okay, so I want to end with some of my poems because Afrofuturism also presents a discussion and an argument about not only where Black folks have been, but how the present state of our being, whether in society or globally, is moving us forward. In recent years, we have had great concerns, and even today, with social justice issues. And we all know what many of those are. I will not go into length about these cases, but I became concerned as a poet and writer in the last several years with writing and recording some of these events through my poetry and being able to share my thoughts during poetry performances, at readings, and also in publications. So I'd just like to end my reading with a few poems for the listeners here. And this poem is titled Piece of Peace. I need a piece of peace that stands tall like a brave queen in white, carrying a sage smudge wand, dancing with courage in between metal stakes, in between buildings with no light, staring into eyes with no soul. I need a piece of peace that caresses hills and mountains, ringing Tibetan bells, springing holy water on a patch of hell. I need a piece of peace that talks back to the crooked paths and the corrupted crooks, that saves the sinner and soothes the saint. I need a piece of peace that is a living testament, singing glory, glory, hallelujah, reaching back into history to slay a thing called hate. I need a piece of peace that greases my scalp, steeps a pot of peppermint herbal tea on the stove, and meditates in the morning on a thing called love. I need a piece of peace that pushes through concrete, reaches out to sunlight, dissolving the stench of hate, creating a stance of courage, covering festering wounds, a mist of possibility, splitting the hold that ignorance manifested, birthing the spirit of hope. Okay, this next poem is titled The Link. It's like pain exploding into purple and then nothingness. It's like voices in a riot, never-ending chanting, and hands linking Selma to Ferguson. It's like justice for injustice, something that don't come around too often, like a yellow cat with blue stripes, a grown baby, a pimp for president, an indictment for illegal murder. Then again, it's like an all-night vigil with somebody hanging in the balance. It's like trembling when you feel that something ain't right feeling in the pit of your stomach. That after this moment, things will never be the same, and maybe things will never be different. Okay, I'm gonna read one more because I'm in the flow. Let me just end with one more here. And this is one of I did a series of poems related to Ferguson, Missouri. For those of you who understand what I mean, the case with the teenager Michael Brown that really kicked off nationwide, locally in the St. Louis metro area, but nationwide and later globally, racial justice protests and questions about the status of Black folks in communities where there is issues of lack of safety, mistrust of, folks who would be designated to keep the community safe, as well as just a question about so many of these particular disturbing cases. So I just want to read a poem for that. Sorry, I'm trying to get my page in my document. Ferguson in numbers. 9th day of August in 2014 in the county of St. Louis, Missouri, called Ferguson. It became internationally known after widespread outrage and protests in the death of Michael Brown. 18 years old, 6'5" in height, 289 pounds. Michael had 6 entry wounds, 12 shots were fired, 3 exit wounds, 2 grazing wounds, 2 lighters, and 2 $5 bills in his pocket. 24th day of November in 2014, the officer who shot Michael Brown was acquitted of all charges. So I'm going to end there. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for reading your poetry. Like, it just, like, how you bear witness is so beautiful. And the line about, the piece of peace and the hair grease, oh my God. And then the line about the president, like, you have no idea how much I am honored to have you on today.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So the first half of the interview is going to be about the anthology. So I would love to hear from you the origin story of the anthology,
Sure.
introduction to Afrofuturism, and then why this book right now?
Sure. I would say the origin story is my journey in writing and literature, and particularly Black literature. I have been, but also music. Without knowing, right, that every time I listen to John Coltrane or Alice Coltrane or, Sun Ra or, musicians such as Jimi Hendrix, Nina Simone, when you listen to their music, it is like, it's gospel in a different way. It's spiritual music. It's spiritual music created by Black folks. But they're creating, and the benefit is for everyone. But when I listen to that music, to me, that music, whether from Coltrane or Hendrix or Nina Simone or Sun Ra, or even, as I mentioned, Outkast, Erykah Badu, many of these folks, they are essentially poets. They're poets, whether they're writing the musical notes or whether they're writing the lyrics down. And so I've been a student of words for a long time. And I've been a student of Black arts for a long time. And in terms of writers, I'm a fan and a student of, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, which I read in college, and then I've even taught the book many times. Virginia Hamilton, who many people know as the late great children's writer, Virginia Hamilton, her book, Herstories, really touched me. I used to use it when I taught workshops with kids, or when I taught, when I was working in public schools as an elementary teacher and things like that. Virginia Hamilton's work, Zealy, she's the author of the chapbook Zealy. Her work, from, even though she was writing this literature in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I mean, before many of us were even, born or even reading, she already was capturing what I believe as Afrofuturist ideals. She was already writing stories that took, to me, Black folks out of the label of oppression. We know that there's nothing wrong with, we know we have our slave narratives, and we have our literature that does speak to, what the civil rights movement was about, what the pain of slavery was about, what the pain post-civil rights had been about, before the Black arts movement and things like that. But for me, as someone coming up, I would say as a hip hop generation writer and educator, which is how I view myself, I'm studying from those who came before me. I cannot, send Virginia Hamilton a DM or a text or an email to ask her about her work. Like today, you know, some of our students, they can contact, you know, their favorite authors on their websites and Twitter. Many of the authors that I feel I've stood at the feet of, so to speak, they are no longer here, but their work remains. And so when I think about, as I mentioned, a Ralph Ellison or even Zora Neale Hurston, who is my all-time favorite writer and author of any writer, she's my all-time favorite. She, in my view, is the GOAT because she did what few were doing. One, she had so many strikes against her. You're not only Black, you're a woman. You're not only Black and a woman, you're also poor in terms of finances. And still she put her creativity first. And she struggled through that, doing what male writers were doing and receiving so much sponsorship and so much accolade. At the time, she had to fight to be seen as worthy and respectable as a writer. And so Zora Neale Hurston is one of my Afrofuturists that I've sat at her feet studying her work, not only as a student, as a college student, but every time I taught her work to my students, I'm still reteaching myself and understanding, wait a minute, how was Zora Neale Hurston able to write about In Their Eyes Were Watching God, a Black woman who liberates herself from toxic and abusive relationships? Because during the time in which Zora Neale Hurston lived, you didn't liberate yourself from anything. You were either married and attached to a man that provided for you, or you were toiling in poverty on your own some kind of way. And Zora Neale Hurston decided, well, I'll be a researcher, I'll be an anthropologist, I'll do, you know, she worked with different organizations. She had some sponsorship. She did whatever she could to stay above water, but she did not become a wife during a time when that's what you did. You became a wife. Okay, so I'm talking to you about what inspired me. Long before this book, as I was a student of Afrofuturists, before there was Afrofuturism, that really grew in my spirit as a writer, as an academic, as a scholar, as someone who was an editor, because I was an editor long before this book. I published this book, Check the Rhyme, years and years ago, that was nominated for an NAACP Image Award. And I did this on my own. So before I became an academic editor, I did this for poetry, women's poetry. So you asked what came before, and I'm just telling you and the listeners what came before. So we have Ralph Ellison, and we have Zora Neale Hurston. We have one of my favorites, Virginia Hamilton, writing Zealy and writing The People Could Fly and writing her stories where she's adapting Black folk tales. She's going back into the past to reframe folk tales and give us some fantasy and magical realism for children and adults. In her book, let's see if can I reach down and grab this book?
Yes, please do. Okay. Yes.
Because I'm in my, Virginia Hamilton, this to me is one of the Bibles, and you talk about Afrofuturism in terms of writing for children or even adults. Leo and Diane Dillon, award-winning illustrators, brought this, you know, the imagery in Virginia Hamilton's words. Of course, they brought them to life. And if you look at, I'm going to show you something. The very rich illustrations of this.
Oh,
okay.
Wow.
I just feel like everyone should get this book, even if you don't have children. You should have this book. This book, to me, if you're feeling like Black people just don't have the genius, the intelligence, the creativity, here's a reminder. So when we talk about Afrofuturism, Virginia Hamilton, in my perspective, came before, okay? And you have Ralph Ellison, and you have, of course, Octavia Butler, you know, the author, the noted Black speculative fiction author, Octavia Butler, whose series, you know, of books, Pattern Maker and Kindred, and all these wonderful books. Virginia Hamilton grappled with the things that we're focusing and struggling with today. She wrote about pandemics and you know, dystopic futures and all the things that we talk about now. And it's like, this is why people say Octavia Butler was well before her time. You know, she was focusing on protagonists who were would be considered Black feminist protagonists. She would be considered a Black feminist writer. There's so many scholars who look to Octavia Butler as a guide. So when we talk about Afrofuturism, for those of us who've been reading and studying and trying to understand, how did those folks do? How did they achieve and do what they did with their writing and creativity when they had so little? We have so much. They didn't have the technology. They didn't have the financial support. They didn't have the, I would even say in terms of gender, as Black women writers, you know, there were so few in terms of Octavia Butler, of her class at that time, of her class of writers, you know, that they had to create a pathway for themselves so that the rest of us could walk through and not have such a problem or be questioned for why we want to do or focus on the writing and creativity that we do. So I would say that, and also, you know, just, I'm from a family of educators who, you know, my family, my folks made me sit down and watch, you know, the documentaries, Eyes on the Prize, and, you know, anything coming on PBS that had to do with not just Black American culture, but even Caribbean and continental African culture and things relating to Black folks worldwide. You know, I grew up going to dance classes. My mom used to take me over to the East St. Louis, to the Catherine Dunham School of Dance. I feel Catherine Dunham was an Afrofuturist, way ahead of her time, studying the rights and culture and dance of Haitians and going to Haiti to learn from these folks culturally about their spiritual rights and routines and how Black dance is connected globally, right? The dance that we have, and then, you know, the Dunham technique, how that featured so much African dance and Caribbean, and that became what's known as Afro-Caribbean dance. So when you take an Afro-Caribbean or some kind of Dunham technique dance class, you're going to get a fusion of dance from the African diaspora. And so Catherine Dunham, even though I never met her in person, was one of my teachers as a child. So that's what preceded this book. My lifelong study of, I would say, Black folks who think outside the box, outside of their labels, who refuse to be defined by race and gender, the way that we are mostly defined, well, back then, but even now, there's a lot of labeling and a lot of, you know, you're over here because you're this, you need to be over here. These folks that I looked up to and I feel I studied said, no, I will not, I shall not. And I think in some ways, while, you know, I'm within the box, obviously, as an educator, as a writer, I'm obviously still in some boxes that others may label me, but I also feel freed in my writing and creativity and in my pulling together diverse voices in this work. There's a freedom in being able to do that. And in having a publisher to accept your work. So I didn't have to publish this on my own. I didn't have to independently publish. Routledge selected my work. They were pleased and they were happy with what I sent them and what was put forth, and they were excited about it. And that feels good, to get to that point in your work where someone else says, you know, this is valuable and we want to put this out and we want to promote this and we want to give you this platform to push other voices out. And so, you know, I appreciate that. And so that conversation that I had with them, they understood what I was trying to do and they embraced it. And I think that's a part of it as well. Getting with whether publishers or other creatives who support your vision, who understand it, and who are not trying to keep you in a box by saying, well, there's not a lot of people doing it, or, oh, well, you know, where's the market for that? We are the market. We create the market when we create. We are the market. And I think that I've always had that point of view. That's why I went into some points of independent publishing, as I'm showing you, Check the Rhyme was independently published, but it received mainstream acknowledgement in a lot of ways, whether reviews or some of the events we did and things like that. So I'm just showing how it all connects. And I'm thankful that the book is here and was birthed, and it took over a year, just so folks would know this is not an overnight process. And even I would say even maybe longer than that, because when I started visualizing and thinking, I'm doing my own creating before I even got to the point of contacting or reaching out to a publisher. So for those folks who wonder, well, how long does something like that take? Putting a volume together, there are a lot of different steps, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. So, yeah.
Thank you. So you offered Dr. Frazier. That felt like I just got an MFA and doctoral degree. And
oh my gosh.
In that conversation.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, because like one of the things I definitely want to applaud, and this could segue into the next question. This is I don't know if people realize this is a major academic publisher. Like, yeah. Huge. And so this means is getting into the hands of students, professors, and scholars, and to have a book that talks about how Black artists are talking about and creating around liberation and possibilities and like a world where we can exist as ourselves. This is huge. So I want to congratulate you for finding this opportunity to also publish with Routledge. Like, this is huge.
Thank you so much.
I hope people realize how big that is.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And you're exactly right. And I think every time one of us is able to make inroads, it doesn't mean that there's independent publishing certainly has its value. I am a proponent of creating, because are you doing it to be, you have to, it goes back to why are you doing it, right? We don't just create to be quote unquote validated by others. However, you want the work to get out. And I think this is one of, sometimes you have to say, I'm going to submit to a publisher. You want the work to get out. You want the voices that are in the book to get out. You want to be a part of your community in the largest way that you can, in a wide-reaching way that you can. You want to be a part of your writing and your literary community. You want to connect with other people who are doing what you're doing. You want to be able to collaborate. And a lot of times, if no one knows what you're doing, the work doesn't get out, it's hard to do those things. It's hard to collaborate with others, such as yourself, Nicole. It's hard to get on a Black Writers Read or another podcast or platform if people cannot actually see and access your work. And I think we're talking about access. So in terms of my publisher, I appreciate them. This provides another mode of access to the work and the voices that are in this book. The diverse voices, the diverse writing, Black folks who are writing, Black thinkers. Certainly, these are not just Black writers and authors in the work, however. I open my call to everyone, because everyone in this book is writing on the themes, and they're talking about Black creators in some way, shape, or form. They themselves are paying homage to these people, and they are providing our students with greater possibilities in studying literature and scholarship. Okay, so that I do want to say, I'm very grateful for all the contributors in this work. They're all diverse folks from all around, from the US and abroad. So I just want to mention that.
Yeah, so this segues so beautifully into the next question. The anthology, and this is for me huge, and I hope for others who straddle the ivory tower and like pop culture, this is huge as well. The anthology begins with plays and poetry and then transitions into scholarly essays. Like I don't know too many books that straddle the ivory tower and pop culture that does this. And I love that you open with creative writing. That is huge.
Yes,
So can you talk a little bit more about the process of curating and editing the book?
sure,
How were the contributors and their work selected to be an
sure.
anthology? And then why was it important to open it with creative
Sure.
writing?
Without going into every minuscule detail, I will just say I put a call out. I put a call out, as well as there were some authors who were invited. So it was a mix of invited authors and a call. I had themes that I was working with. I had a vision for the book. The book would have chapters, and obviously because it has different genres in it, I am creating a story. So we're telling a story in this work, not only through the voices who are here, but the genres. And so I start with creative writing because, well, I have a love for creative writing. So we're telling a story, we're giving you a mixtape, and we know from the hip hop standpoint, a mixtape, selects. I'm gonna select from my best work. I'm gonna give the people the hottest sample, all on one mixtape, all on one, my demo. And so that's what this is. So in my view, I'm giving the people the hottest samples on, this is our mixtape that we're giving you. And so my mixtape has to have poetry. It has to have creative nonfiction. It has to have some dramatic writing, but it also has to have scholarship, because I'm a scholar and I collaborate and work with other scholars. I'm not just a creative writer. I am also a scholar. I can do both. While some may, again, we talk about boxes and labels. Some people may want to box you or label you as one thing. Oh, yes, she has an MFA in creative writing. Yes, I do, but I'm also a scholar. I can also do research. I've also published scholarly works outside of this book. So I think this is showing that we do have multiple, we can do both at one time. You can be skilled in this and skilled in this, and both can exist together. And that's what this book does represent, and technically is what you mentioned. But also, I just feel like I want to put my people on, just informally, Nicole, I'm putting my people on. I'm putting people in this work whose work I admire, whose work I want students to study, whose work I want other scholars and researchers to read and study, whose work I want to be put on, other platforms because they're in this book. And so I think it serves as multiple purposes, but definitely my being a poet and being connected to other poets, my having done other creative nonfiction, I've written blogs, I've written essays, I've written children's writings, I've written in different genres, that I'm someone that appreciates it. And so I want to present what I also appreciate. And I think that that's what helped form the story in the book. So we're taking you from part one, which is, Black poetics and drama and creative nonfiction and prose. And then we're going to part two, which is giving you more of the scholarship on, Black arts and music and film. And then we're segueing to part three, which we're getting into scholarship in Black feminisms and Black speculative prose. And we've got a mix of, so some of the works are essays that present this writer's perspective on some aspect of Afrofuturism, and in terms of their life or their writing. And then other samples on the mixtape are literary criticism. And we're talking about Octavia Butler, we're talking about Nnedi Okorafor, and other known Black speculative authors. And then we have other scholarship that's just talking about Afrofuturism in Black film and what that has been in recent years. And so I'm very proud that this work, the mixtape, as I mentioned, is giving something for everyone. So if you're a faculty, if you're a professor, as I mentioned in the intro and in the book's description, so if you teach Africana studies, or you teach film studies or pop culture, or you teach Black womanism and women's and gender studies, there are chapters in here that can fully be merged in your curriculum, in your course, in whatever discipline that you're in terms of humanities and writing and composition and, arts, relations to the arts, in terms of the subject matter here, I feel is well paired with it.
So the next question that I have for you, even though I know listeners and those who are viewing today are going to benefit for it, it's actually going to, I think, benefit me more because I really want to explore the genre more.
Sure.
For writers interested in exploring Afrofuturism in their own work, how would they employ the genre into their writing?
Well, I would say know who came before you. My work is a sample. So while this is one work, there are many, many others who are cited in this book, who came before us, who came before me in terms of scholarship in Afrofuturism. So those folks would be Mark Derry, who I mentioned, whose essay Black to the Future gives a definition of Afrofuturism. And you also have Alondra Nelson, and you have Dr. Ronaldo Anderson, who's a professor at Temple University, whose work is quite prolific on Afrofuturism in terms of him focusing on Black speculative arts movement. And you also have folks like Sheree R. Thomas, who is the editor of a noted work, Dark Matter, A Century of Speculative Fiction from the African Diaspora. And there are many others. Paul Youngquist, who has an essay in my volume. Paul Youngquist is a professor who tends to focus on Afrofuturism and Black music. And he's been studying and writing about Sun Ra for a long time. So I think folks that are interested in writing on Afrofuturism or just developing their own perspective in it, dive into who the leading Afrofuturist scholars are. You have Ytasha Womack. Her second book is about to come out, actually. I'm following her on Instagram, and Ytasha is an Afrofuturist author, but she's also a filmmaker, and she also does a lot of work in Chicago with museums. And Ytasha's first book, Afrofuturism, The World of Black Sci and Fantasy Culture, Ytasha really gives us a great look into her own life and how she became an Afrofuturist from an Afrofuturist, I would say, Black feminist lens. Starting with the question of, if you were watching Star Wars many years ago, or you were a Harry Potter fan, or many of the quote unquote sci-fi works that have come, in many years, the question of why weren't there Black folks in a lot of these works? Why wasn't there wide or even a consistent Black appearance in a lot of these works? And so I think, Ytasha Womack discusses that question. Our book talks about that. So any writer who's interested in this genre or unfamiliar, I would say start with some of those voices. The bibliography in my book gives you those voices. So start with the bibliography here, with the references that are in our book will lead anyone into the world of Afrofuturist writing, scholarship, voices, what the perspectives are. There was certainly a wonderful exhibit at the Smithsonian, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, on Afrofuturism, and a book that was published as connected to that particular exhibit, and by Kevin Young. And so people can look at the curation of that particular exhibit and the literature on the museum's website that was connected to that exhibit. And I would say, definitely start there. And then, of course, look at our work because it's giving, this was published in 2024. So it's giving you some contemporary looks at Afrofuturism across Black arts, but we also pay homage to those who came before us. So I would say that would be important to just go back a little bit and see who's done what, and then see where your perspectives and your ideas may fit in with that work.
Nice. The next question, so for folks who are watching and listening, I typically send questions ahead of time to our guests. I want to amend the next question a little bit because as you were reading, it made me really think about like soul funk music of the 70s, which I grew up with because of my parents. And then I don't know if it's fair to call them the children of soul and funk music, the Erykah Badu's, the Missy Elliott's, the Outkast, the Jill Scotts. These are two periods of music that are very formative for me. And so the question that I have is, because in your essay, you pay homage to the music of the 70s, which for folks, if you don't know historically what was happening at the time, we were kind of coming slowly out of the Black arts movement. Black feminism kind of started in 73 or 74 with Ntozake Shange and her work and others. And so we're seeing this, and also too, we have, and I'm not saying that the genres inform one another, but there was a big moment happening with African-American cultural production in the 70s, where we also have Blaxploitation film. And then we fast forward to the early 21st century, where we have Missy Elliott, not only Missy Elliott and things that's happening in music, but we have living single girlfriends. We have these visual representations of Black women, not necessarily agency, but just Black women being on screen. And so my amended question is, why given Dr. Frazier, I would love to hear from you why you think the 70s and then the early 21st century were these moments where this type of liberatory message in music, in film, and poetry. Why do you think the 70s and the early 2000s were able to allow for that type of cultural production?
Sure, Nicole. I think that's a great question. And I would certainly say perhaps the answer is in a part of your question in mentioning, you said, well, I don't want to say that they're the children of. Okay, are they, I might even say, I think I've once said, whether in this chapter or something else, that I look at Erykah Badu as the goddaughter. Maybe she was a goddaughter of Nina Simone, a goddaughter of, or an Outkast, the godsons of the last poets, or, you know what I mean? So in looking at that link, because I don't know that they would want to be, as you mentioned, considered children of, as in they were their parents. But I think that every generation seeks to answer some of the same questions that Black folks have been grappling with in this society, in this existence in America. I just think that our generations each kind of do it differently, right? So where we have the civil rights movement and we have the outgrowth of that, the Black arts movement with, Leroy, with Amiri Baraka, and with Dr. Haki Madhubuti, and we had, Sonia Sanchez and Nikki Giovanni and the Last Poets and H. Rap Brown and all these brilliant poets, and Jane Cortez and Dr. Ntozake Shange. These folks were answering a question. So if we think of it in the vein of, all right, Afrofuturism, where are we going, folks? Are we riding out into the sunset? If so, how are we riding out? Are we going with, blazing? Are we going singing songs? And if so, what kind of songs? Are we going doing poetry, or what kind of poetry? Liberation was on their minds. Okay, so while we are, quote unquote, as one of my guests, I think on my podcast, I talked about with one of my guests in recent months, they talked about the Black Arts Movement and talked about what it was like to, okay, now you can go to college anywhere. Now your parents can live just about anywhere. So, quote unquote, segregation is not as it was. There may be, obviously there's still some segregation, but so the experience might be a little bit, I know the guests, but I won't say their name. I remember them discussing, the opportunity they had to study and go to certain schools, right? So maybe while it appears that there were some roadblocks that were removed, we were still grappling with our state of being and our state of being free creatively, politically, economically, and in a lot of ways, maybe in educational ways. And I can't fully say all of what they were thinking because I was not there exactly while they were creating. But as a student of their work, I would say, what Sonia Sanchez did for Black poetry in the 70s, she somehow passed that on to, Talib Kweli, Mos Def, Common, The Roots, Jill Scott, Erykah Badu. So I feel the baton was passed, and now it's time for this group to now, okay, tell the story and answer the question again. Okay, tell the story in your way, how your soul remembers it, and answer the question again that we've been grappling with. Because now we have a new generation that needs to be informed. So they're doing it for their generation. And then the generation that exists now, although you have so many people that want to criticize some of the female rappers in hip hop today, perhaps they are telling a story of their experience. And perhaps they are still answering that same question of liberation, of freedom, of what is our place, of how are we riding out into the sunset? Do we have a sunset? And what vehicle is taking us out there? It just may sound and look a bit different, but it's the same to me. It's answering the same question, and it is still telling our story. That's where I find the connection. So without saying, well, they're just the children of, maybe they don't find that a compliment. Okay, but can you be the godchildren of? Could you have absorbed spiritually what they were doing? You might not have been living at that time. Maybe you weren't born yet, but you still got the knowledge because it's out here. And you can still study it, whether in books or video. While Dr. Shange is not here, I was fortunate to meet her. I was fortunate to bring her to St. Louis, a place that she lived in 2017 for one of her last performances and readings. We did a beautiful program, 2 days, with Dr. Shange at the Missouri History Museum. I was able to listen to this woman talk about her genius. Anybody in that auditorium was able to get some magic from Dr. Ntozake Shange during that program at the Missouri History Museum. So I feel like while you may not have been able to study directly, I've heard people say they studied with Dr. Sanchez at Temple, or they studied with Toni Morrison at Howard. I didn't have the benefit to do that, okay? When I came along, they were way done teaching. However, it is up to me, as you mentioned, you asked me, for people who want to create an Afrofuturism, well, if you want to be a Black poet, or you want to be a Black performer who is going between poetry and song or this or that, or you want to talk about our liberation and our history, you have to study who came before you. Because the question always hangs, how dare they, if they didn't go through the process of understanding who paved the way for them? Okay, so in Erykah Badu, she studied. This woman knows her craft. We know that. She knows who came before her. You hear it in her song. You hear it when she does interviews. You see it on her. You know people that have studied what came before them because they didn't just crop up somewhere and throw something together. They did it in a meaningful way. They've been creating the art in a meaningful way to inspire and educate people for a long time. Okay. And so that's really what I want to say about that, Nicole. I hope, did I answer your question?
No, it was so
Okay.
spot on because like one of the things, because I teach as well, and one of the things my students, well, one, it's sad that many of them, especially being young people of color from urban areas, don't know a lot of the writers that you've listed. And so whenever I say, okay, you want to do this, you need to go back and look at this, they don't want to do that. And I'm just like, okay, like, one, you're not, it's not that you can't create anything new, but you are, especially for writers of marginalized communities, creators of marginalized communities, especially with a mission for change, you are continuing a conversation.
It's
And I
important.
think,
Just
yeah.
like you have to ask them, what do grandmothers do in a family? What do aunts do? Pass things down. Maybe for them, it starts with, have you ever had someone in your family tell you a story about growing up or something that happened to someone, your mother, your father in the family? It starts from sharing the stories, just even in your own life. Maybe, some of us, I come from that kind of background where my people they valued being informed by history. They valued history. Okay, so maybe that's most likely where I got my value from. So I think as educators, you bring up an important point. How do we do it for students who maybe did not grow up in a print or literary rich home environment? Maybe history and culture were not the main thing they were, studying or presenting to their youth in the home. And it happens, and we understand that. Then start with, what do you learn from the people around you? What have you gotten from your grandmother, your aunt, or your grandfather? Do you have any elder people in your family? What have they shared with you? How has that informed the way you think or the way you go about your daily life? I know they've told you something, good, bad, or indifferent, whether you like it or love it or dislike it. They have shared something with you about their knowledge or memory from the past, even if it was how they lived it. Then that's what we're talking about. If you're going to be a student of something, you have to go back. That is your duty and responsibility.
So thank you so much, Dr. Frazier. This is, oh my gosh, so amazing. So this nicely segues into, I want to transition to talking about your writing career.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to read your poetry collection, Goddess Under the Bridge, published in 2013. I love that you wrote this collection, and this is quoting you, for lost and found goddesses and wild women everywhere. What I love about Goddess Under the Bridge is that I can easily visualize you legit holding the hands of the people you're talking to, looking deep into their eyes, the women that you're speaking to. Like, I love this work so much. As Goddess Under the Bridge just celebrated over 10 years since publication, I'd love to know how the reception of this work has evolved since its release, and if you had the opportunity to contribute more poems to the collection, who would the poems be addressed to? Which themes would you explore and why?
Okay, so I'm looking to reach for that book now.
Yeah.
And I thank you for that question. And I'm like, okay, is it in the top of my case? You know
Yes.
what? Let me just start talking. Okay, thank you for that, Nicole. One, I want to say I'm not currently adding to that work. I have some other things I'm working on. Two of the poems I shared with you earlier are in something else that I've been working on. But what I want to say, Goddess Under the Bridge really was a collection that gave my homage to women artists.
Mhm.
It also was me speaking to myself, I would say, in a lot of ways. So it's me speaking to my creative self. It's me paying homage to women artists. There's a poem in there for Alice Coltrane. There are other poems that have other references to artists. And I also think that it's a poem that, not a poem, well, Goddess Under the Bridge is a poem in the book, but I also think it's a collection that's like, okay, if I had to share my work with Dr. Shange, you know, would she see her influence? I hope so, because she influenced my work. Dr. Sanchez influenced my work. Nikki Giovanni influenced my work. So when I'm writing about whether it's women's creativity, whether I'm writing about music, whether I'm writing about women's self-esteem or my own, thoughts as a creative, as a writer, or someone just existing in life that's going through the same ups and downs as anyone else, I'm still in the back of my mind thinking, you know what? Lucille Clifton inspired me. Let me, write a poem in thinking about her work. Maybe it's not exactly her style, but maybe it's answering a question I have about something they wrote or a poem that they wrote. Because I know I have a poem for Lucille Clifton in that book. But I also think I really wanted to find the book, Nicole, because I usually have them right here, and see if I can. One other thing I want to say, I think Goddess Under the Bridge also reflects maybe memory. I think a big part of that collection has to do with my own memory. Um, I think I was thinking about the childhood and development of an artist. Like, I still think about that, like how did I become an artist? So I think some of the poems in that work speak to that, Blues River, there's a poem in there, Blues River, that is also about, it's like, to me, a St. Louis Midwest poem, because I grew up in the Midwest. So I have some poems that for me are paying homage to a certain region, And so I think that collection has a lot, and it speaks to just my study at that time, what I was studying and reading and what I was inspired by, but always being inspired by Black women poets. So I probably wouldn't add to it, but I want to continue my work in whatever way I can. And so I'm choosing to work on some other things. That book I did read quite a bit at different events, various readings, wherever I was asked to read. That's one of my collections that I will read a selection of poems from. And I would say the embrace of that work was just through my readings and through me doing educational programs with students. And I bring my books along with me if I'm doing talks with public schools, if they're ordering my book, if they're going to present my book in a particular program like Black History Month or Women's History Month, and that's how I would use that collection. Yeah.
Nice. Prior to having our guests on Black Writers Read, we ask each of them why they write. Here's what you contributed. I'm inspired to motivate students of all ages to read and enjoy literature. I write because it's important to tell our stories in all ways that we can. I also write to connect with audiences and share a love for books with others. Being an author means being an artist and having the privilege of being someone who works in imagination and creativity to inspire others. Your very expansive canon of work, which is just amazing and phenomenal, includes
Thank you.
poetry. Yeah, poetry, both spoken word and for the published page, plays, scholarly work, and young adult fiction. So I'd love to know how you explore subjectivity for your narrators, protagonists, and readers in your work. How does your literary voice thread through these genres, and why is it important to you to write for these various audiences?
Well, for me, just starting with my work for young readers, I studied writing for children and also poetry and prose in my MFA program. So that was one of the things that I was intent on studying. I was a public school teacher before and part of my before my program and during part of my MFA program. I at the time, you know, except for the wonderful Walter Dean Myers and maybe a few works by Jacqueline Woodson, Sharon Draper, of course, and maybe The Skin I'm In, you know, Sharon Flake. It just, at the time when I was teaching middle school, there were not a lot of works. When you talk about needing to put together a library and needing to give at-home reading assignments for you know, where students would actually want to do them and want to read the work. We, during that time, teaching in that age group, the middle grade group, and that's like grade 6 to 8, you know, many of us in education found that what we needed for our Black students and our students in urban areas is high interest books, what became known as high interest engaging reading. I was a teacher that I would spend hundreds of dollars during the year, or, you know, I'd buy a batch of books and then, you know, 3-4 months later, I'm back at Barnes and Noble, or I'm going to whatever the store, you know, Books A Million or Borders, to get middle grade and YA books that I thought my kids would be interested in. And it was tough. It was tough finding. They would tell me, well, you know, Miss Frazier, we want to read about this, or I bring things and they go, well, we don't really like that. It's not speaking to us. Or the school would order batches of books because they had a, you know, a contract with some publisher or educational outsourced group that gives books. And a lot of the kids were not interested in those books. So what I would do was, you know, I would give them Walter Dean Myers. We love reading 135th Street. We love reading The Skin I'm In. But then once you read those few books, then what? We have a whole year that we've got to go that we need high interest. And so that's where I came in with, I was already writing poetry. My students all knew I was a poet. I used to invite my writer friends and journalism friends into the classroom to speak to them. But I realized I can also write stories for young readers. I'm talking to these kids every day. I know them. They talk to me about their neighborhood, what happened at home, the different challenges they face, whatever they may be. And I decided, you know what? I was once a youth. I loved reading. I lived in the library. Now I'm teaching youth. And I'm pushing them saying, get your library card. You got to get a library card. Like I was a broken record with that. I wanted my library in the classroom to be diverse. And I decided I'm already a poet. Let's take it a step further. Let's write for young people. And that's where my motivation came in. I'm already teaching them. And I would even write things and have my students read it and be like, what do you think? What do you think? Is this realistic? Sometimes, not all the time. Would you read this? There were times, like if we're in the after school program and things like that, it wouldn't be during class, but like if we're in the after school arts program or I'm, you know, they're in the room and they're doing, you know, their homework, I'm like, okay, y'all, do y'all want to read something? And they'd be like, sure, Miss Frazier. So, you know, sometimes my kids will give me some feedback. And so that's how I got into it, Nicole. But also I was fortunate during my MFA program to write for Rocket Learning. So I'm holding up a publication, and I
Oh,
don't know if they're still in existence because I think they became Redbird Learning, but they were based in New York, and I had the opportunity to write stories for this. These were student readers, and they were for educational programs in schools. So while I was a teacher and then I became an MFA writing student, I also had the great experience of writing literacy readers. And this is like, I used to always wonder when I was a kid and when I was a student, like, wow, how do people get published in textbooks? How do people write stories for kids? So I was on that journey and I became someone who was doing that. So I want to shout out to my writer friend, colleague, and also someone who came through the MFA program I was in. She was ahead of me, but Tanya Hegeman, who you might know. I want to shout out Tanya Hegeman because Tanya was writing and working with Rocket Learning, and she brought me into it. She brought me along, right? So she got her MFA. She started working with them, and while I was getting my MFA, this opportunity landed in my lap. And here's one of the stories I wrote. Oh, it has it has a little post-it in it. But I wrote an article with Tanya Hegeman called "Discovering the Multiple Intelligences," and this is in a literacy reader. And I was able to write for 3 or 4 of these. So in terms of my development as a writer for young people, like this was it, you know, and then me writing my own work and me getting into my MFA program, all of those things helped inform me becoming a children's writer. And it was just something I really enjoyed. I'm still doing it, but I'm just busy with a lot of things. So it's not the only thing I'm working on, but it's just a love that I have, you know?
I love that. So I have like 2 more questions for you. So
Yeah.
you are a fellow podcaster. So I would love to talk
Yes.
briefly, yeah, about Nerdacity and Afrofutures. How does your mission continue through these initiatives, and then what's next for each of the
Sure.
podcasts?
Well, my mission is always, if it's not just on my work, my mission is always to promote diverse voices and particularly Black poets and writers. That's always my mission. So I'm starting with that. And then, so Nerdosity was started as a quote unquote pandemic podcast. Yes. So for me, I feel like I was one of the first literary, I'm not sure who all was doing. So 2020 is when I started my podcast, and I was interviewing fantastic poets and writers, which folks can check my Instagram at Nerdosity Podcast. You can check Spotify or YouTube, and you'll see some of the archive interviews. But I started with, hey, let me tap my network. Let me get some of these genius folks on the horn to discuss their work. They cannot do book signings at this time. They cannot go to the local poetry venue to read. I had already some years ago had a blog talk radio show. So some people might feel like, oh, she popped out of the blue. No, ma'am, no, sir. No, I did not. Because I had a blog talk radio years ago. If some people might remember blog talk radio, I don't know if they still have it, where I used to interview poets and authors and business leaders. And like, I love doing like radio. Like, as a poet, I used to do radio. Like you know what I mean? Like I was a guest poet on different radio shows at times. So I got a gist of how to do it. Like, okay, so now we're on the web. Now let's look at how to do it for the web. Okay, so that's kind of before Nerdosity and before Afrofutures Pod. So Nerdosity started out as a pandemic digital podcast project, and then I just continued it on. It was never like, oh, let me start this and stop it as soon as the pandemic was over. I think I felt like it was just an extension of my work. I used to interview writers on my blog when I had a blog spot, right? Like back in the day, like this is how a lot of people know me. So I've always been someone that promotes other people, that promotes other writers and authors, that promotes and wants to get other people's voices out, not just my own. I understand that there are some writers and artists that are just focused on themselves. I think my mission has been one that includes my community, and I'm okay with that. Even if it means, oh, well, she may, hey, even if it means I'm at a, well, I won't say what I was going to say. What I'll say is this: my focus has never been singular, just individual to me. And that may just be particular to my purpose, and I'm okay with that. I enjoy everything that I do, and I feel like my work and my activity and productivity is also connected and in relationship to others. No person is an island unto themselves. While I understand I could have just written an Afrofuturism essay on my own and called it a day, I could have. I just could have wrote my chapter and submitted it to a journal and been like, done, Dr. Frazier got hers. But I don't think that way. I'm usually thinking about how to pull other people into, how to involve my community, because I enjoy the community I'm a part of. So that's where Nerdosity came from. And then Afrofutures Pod came from, we got this book, y'all. We got this book and we need to talk about it. However, so I interview my contributors, but I'm also doing other interviews as well in the world of Afrofuturism, and however other people find themselves in Afrofuture themes, discussions, scholarship, creative writing, film works, digital creation, then I'm talking with them. So that's all. It's just a theme talk, but we're gonna, talk the Black writing and Black literature and all that, the Black voices and things like that.
Yeah. And then lastly, what's next for you and how can the Black Writers Read community support you on this journey?
Oh my gosh, thank you for that question. What is next for me? Well, tomorrow I have interviews that I have not released, Nicole. So I would say just keep following what we're doing, like and comment. I'm in the flow of interviewing and creating some things right now that have not been released, but just stay tuned for Afrofutures Pod. I'm interviewing a contributor tomorrow. I've interviewed a few folks. I have some behind the scenes work that I'm doing. I would also say, let's see. Well, I just presented at a conference. It was virtual, but it was it was the Georgia Carolinas conference, CEA. So we didn't have to be like in person, but I do things like that. So I would just say maybe look out for those kind of things. And I will tag Black Writers Read on anything that's that I think you might like, literary based, on the socials.
Nice. Thank you. And also feel free to send other writers my way, because I definitely want to talk more about Afrofuturism, which I had Raina J. Leon on 2 seasons ago.
She's amazing, and she is one of the poets in the book. She's amazing, definitely. Can I just plug my website?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so folks, thank you for listening, and please go to my website, DuEwaWorld.com, that features information on how to get in touch with me. It has most of my books up there. It, I believe, has a contact page if you're interested. Follow Nerdosity Podcast at Nerdosity Podcast on Instagram. Follow the book here, updates on our events and podcasts at Afrofuturism book. And you can also fan me on Facebook. I have a page called DuEwa that is published. And you can follow me on X at DuEwa Frazier 1. And that's, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'll be sure when I publish the audio podcast to put it in the show notes, and also I'll be sure to put it in the notes for the video recording on YouTube.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
DuEwa, thank you so much for just being you and writing, and also I appreciate your love and support for Black Writers Reads so much, because you're always sharing my work, and I'm like, thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Appreciate everything you do. We'll be checking you out and supporting what you do and sharing your content there. And I look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you so much. So we can touch base a little bit because I'm gonna wrap up a little bit and then end. So I'll be right back. So thank you all for joining us for episode 10 of season 5 of Black Writers Read. I'll be back on Friday, December 13th and Saturday, December 14th. I told y'all I was going to try to get in a lot of people before the end of the year. I have 2 amazing guests lined up. I am so excited. So please be sure to find me on Instagram at Black Writers Read or subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Nicole Young Martin, as I will be announcing the next 2 guests on the platform. I am very excited for the next 2 guests that I have on. Support Black Writers Read by subscribing to my YouTube channel, where many of you are joining us from today, or the audio podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify. Also, feel free to drop a review of Black Writers Read on one of these platforms, as by supporting me as a subscriber or reviewer, you're helping to grow my community, which is helping towards longer-term sustainability. Visit blackwritersread.com to learn more about the podcast. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and more importantly, for ensuring that Black authors continue to matter. I will see you next week.